This story is about Enkrid, a talentless man who dreams of becoming a knight. Even after endless training, he was only able to become a squad leader in the Empire military. A war is taking place, and he is fighting desperately. He is trying to survive as much as possible while swinging his sword. While trying to run away from the incoming arrows, he was attacked from the front. A sword pierced his chest and he died. His spirit is moving towards the afterlife. But he got stuck in a realm between life and death. When he opened his eyes, he was back to the same day he died. Initially, he thought of the past events as a dream, but everything that he experienced was the same again. From the war to the moment of his death, everything remains the same. Like this, he died the second time, then the third time, the fourth time, and so on. He came to realize that the day was repeating itself. His fear of death is washed away, and the only path ahead is to become the strongest knight. Our story begins in the Empire military camp. A person wakes everyone in the morning. Our protagonist, Enkrid, is a bit annoyed by the loud noise outside. One of his subordinates is also complaining about a bug in his shoes. With all this, his distressing day has begun. Enkrid narrates that after causing a lot of trouble, he got demoted to a squad leader for a bunch of idiots. The scene shifted to the beginning of the war. Enkrid continued his narration by stating that he did not possess any special powers and that he had only reached his current level through endless training. He mentioned that on this day he met his end. He had no talent, and his dream was out of his reach. He hoped that even if everyone laughed at him and told him that his dream would never come true, as long as there was a sword in his hand, he would one day become a knight. With that, after all the struggles, a sword pierces his chest. He dropped to the ground and met a pathetic death on the battlefield. His spirit traveled towards the afterlife. He opened his eyes to see a hazy scene. He was stopped at a realm between life and death. With a loud bang, he opened his eyes once again. His subordinate beside him was still complaining about a bug in his shoes. He thought of the previous events as a dream, but everything repeated itself from the war to his death. Everything remained the same and he died the second time. Then the third time, the fourth time, and so on. The enemy's sword piercing through his throat, the burning sensation, everything he felt was real. He realized that the day kept repeating itself, and he was stuck in it, dying again and again. It was a perfect stab. The blade's tip he had seen for the 17th time, and with that came his 17th death. Enkrid contemplates that if he had wielded his sword with just a bit more effort and had just worked a bit harder, then perhaps he wouldn't have died. Enkrid is lying in the realm between life and death. He heard an ominous voice, doubting the credibility of his contemplation. The sound of the voice revealed to be the Reaper who guides the soul to the afterlife. The Reaper told Enkrid to struggle and then give up. The Reaper stated that the despair in front of a wall could not be crossed. Enkrid was enraged at this statement. And with that, the same day began with the loud noise again. The subordinate beside him was surprised at him, waking up immediately. Enkrid told him that there was a bug in his shoes. He checked and he was surprised to find it. Enkrid's subordinate asked if he was the one who had put the bug in his shoes. Enkrid replied that he had just seen it crawl in earlier. Enkrid thought that it was his 18th time seeing the bug. Then he exited the tent while contemplating whether he would be able to end the repeating days if he had seen it a few more times. The scene switched to Enkrid past, where he learned swordsmanship from a retired mercenary. The mercenary praised Enkrid for his swordsmanship talent and told him that he could become a knight. This is where his dream began. A knight is someone who can slay 1,000 people by himself and change the state of war by himself. An invincible hero. Enkrid thought that he was a protagonist of the song Wandering Minstrel sang. With his dream, he left his village. At the mercenary guild, some people were making fun of a newbie who got scared of a mere stray dog and had a dream of becoming a knight. Enkrid, who left his village, sat in the back, entered a mercenary corps, and learned that he was nothing special. But he was still hopeful because he believed that hard work would not betray him. If he were not talented, then he would work hard and with time and effort he would overcome his lack of talent. He had gained experience, strength, and endurance to be acknowledged by people around him. He became stronger. He could become a knight. But that strong hope was shattered. There was a child in the village he was staying at who requested a duel. He was only 12 years old and had only started to learn swordsmanship for 6 months. Enkrid called himself a dunce who had spent over a decade wielding a sword to the point where his palms were wrecked. He was endlessly more pathetic than a genius with a 6-month experience. Enkrid, who was doubting his hard work, refused to give up. He wanted to become a knight. Everyone may belittle him, saying it's a hopeless dream, but spending less time eating and sleeping than others. He believed while endlessly swinging his sword again and again and again. Even if he can't become a knight, he could at least become an experienced soldier. 3 years later, at the present Cyprus Division, the 4 companies for platoons and below that for squads. He had become a squad commander of the so-called second-rate warriors. It was the best position he could achieve after his endless training, but at least it was better to be a soldier than a traveling mercenary. Encred called his subordinate Jackson, who was sitting alone. Jackson answered and asked why he was called. Encred told him to do his morning rotation duty today. Jackson was silent for a bit, then he agreed and asked him to repay him for this next time. Rem, one of Encred's other subordinates, was not pleased by Jackson's wildcat-like behavior. Encred called Rem, and he replied that if he can also push something onto him as well. Encred asked Rem to teach him Heart of the Beast. Rem was surprised because Encred had previously given up on this skill because he couldn't learn it. The Nalilia versus Aspen close combat battle began. Again and again Encred died and came back to life. Although he learned Heart of the Beast from Rem each time, but he still could not watch the tip of the sword that stabbed him. But today he was confident. The soldiers were assembled, and the war started again. This is Encred's 20th time on the same battlefield. He had memorized this repeating situation. He dodged the spear that came from the back, and then next was an attack from the soldier behind him. Another squad member, Vel, would die soon. An arrow came charging at him, but Encred blocked it. Vel was about to attack from behind, but then again saved by Encred. With that, by saving Vel and killing that soldier, his first goal for today is finished. And what's left now was the person who had taken his lifetime after time. They both faced off. This soldier had stabbed Encred's neck 20 times. But this time, he was confident that he would survive. We see the past scenario where Rem is teaching Encred about the heart of a beast. He stated that Encred always closes his eyes in dangerous situations. He swings his axe at him, just barely stopping around his neck. Encred's eyes were closed due to fear. Rem told Encred that if he closed his eyes on the battlefield, he would die. He needs to be brave and become someone who doesn't fear death. Just like a beast. This is what is called Heart of the Beast. In the present, the soldier attacked Encred. Encred contemplated that a beast is not afraid of death. And neither is he. Death is something that makes him stronger. With all his previous efforts, he finally dodged that stab. His heart was beating fast. For the first time on his 21st try, he dodged the stab. And just before he was about to counter, he initiated a stab from behind. Right at the neck of Encred, and he died again. In the realm between life and death, the Reaper appeared again in his boat, encouraging Encred to give up all the despair and to get on the boat. He told Encred to acknowledge his weak self. Encred refused, stating that the day would never come. He was happy because he finally saw the tip of the sword and dodged it. The same day began. Rem again was surprised by his immediate awakening. Encred was moving forward one step at a time, and he resolved to challenge the 22nd time again. In the midst of the war, with soldiers fighting for their lives, Encred thought to himself that this was the 33rd time. He darted at the sword, pointing at his neck, thinking he could see it clearly. He avoided the sword, believing he'd dodge it before it reached him. Yet the soldier, with swift movements, pointed his sword at Encred again. He gritted his teeth, thinking the soldier was too fast. Unable to maintain his composure, Encred kneeled down, and with a swift attack, his blue pendant tore off and fell to the ground. He recalled a time during his days as a mercenary when he had taken a few requests to subjugate monsters. He hadn't been compelled to do so, but had stumbled upon a place where he was asked for help. He decided to assist because his dream was to become a knight, and protecting the weak was a knight's duty. For killing the monsters and saving the village, a man told him that their village was poor, so all they could offer was a blue pendant. Encred had thought it was a laughable reward for risking his life. The old man, wearing a cloak and hiding his face, had told him he would grant what he desperately prayed for. Back on the battlefield, Encred lay on the ground, wondering while looking at the pendant if it could be the reason today kept repeating itself, just so he could become a knight. The soldier approached him, saying he must be in pain and offering him mercy by placing his sword to attack him. Encred tried to stand up, but his body only shivered. He looked at the soldier with glaring eyes, thinking that mercy was a joke. Watching him smirk shamelessly, Encred thought he was just a pervert who gained pleasure from stabbing people. The soldier then stabbed Encred in the back. A loud clang was heard as someone rang the bell. Inside the tent, Encred told Rem he had put an insect in his boot. Rem shouted, took the insect out of his boot, and asked if Encred had lost his mind, playing tricks right at the start of the day. But Encred walked away, telling him to stop talking and come out, stepping on the bug that came out of Rem's boot. He looked at Rem and told him to teach him the heart of the beast. With the sun out, hot and shiny, Rem jumped at Encred to attack him with an axe. Encred observed intently and managed to dodge the attack just in time. Rem gave Encred an interrogated gaze and asked what he was doing and how the skin of his heart had suddenly gotten thicker out of nowhere. Encred replied that he had trained, but Rem countered that it wasn't something that could happen so quickly. Encred thought that this had already happened more than 10 times. Rem said that there was no way his family's secret technique would be taught to another person. Encred thought it was like what he said, it was a sensation he learned from death. Encred turned back and said what was so important about that, adding that maybe he had learned it by chance. He checked some swords, took one out, and told Rem to have one more bout of sparring. Rem looked at him, smiled, and said that sounded great. Encred thought that even if he learned the heart of the beast, he would just get killed if he couldn't land a strike. Rem jumped at Encred to attack, and Encred dodged it again. Rem shouted, asking how long he was going to dodge while making a strike with his axe. Encred dodged the attack again, but barely this time. He thought that the only sword technique he possessed right now was the Valen mercenary sword technique. He gritted his teeth and thought it was an anomalous sword technique made by a mercenary known as Valen. It was a technique that a few spoke ill of and called it a petty trick. Rem laughed and told him his lower body strength was pretty weak. Encred thought that still, among what he had, it was the most decent technique. He got into position and rushed towards Rem with his sword, but Rem threw his sword away with his axe, and the sword fell to the ground. Encred looked at his hand, shivering, and recalled his death at the hands of the soldier. He recalled that for a moment there, he imitated the soldier's stab and called him a pervert. He thought that since he had been stabbed more than 10 times, his body remembered it. He drew his hand back and clenched his fist. Rem said that should have spilled some blood and added that, among what he had shown him so far, the stab just now was the most decent one, so it should go like that with some impact while showing Encred with his axe. He continued that Encred's hands should have bled and added that it was something like that doubts were too doubtful of Encred and this attack couldn't fail. Encred asked if that got blocked and what he should do next. Rem told him he should go with "he can't dodge that" and say "he's dead now." That would make sure he didn't lose the grip on his sword. Encred looked at his hand and thought that, although he explained it poorly, he understood what he meant. The difference between his stab and that bastard stab was that he didn't have confidence in his sword. He remembered fighting the soldier on the battlefield and how his neck was attacked, blood spilling from it, and how he fell to the ground coughing, with the soldier pointing his sword at him, calling it mercy, and piercing his back with it. He thought he had to stab with the intent to kill. He rushed at Rem, shouting, but failed again with his sword flying up in the air. He kept remembering the soldier's words of mercy and his death, thinking of taking one step forward at a time. No, he would advance even if it was just a quarter of a step. On the 111th day, on the 123rd day, and finally on the 124th day, he shouted and jumped towards Rem, pointing his sword at him. Rem asked if he had gone crazy. Blood spilled from his hand holding the sword. Rem told him his hands were worn out with blood gushing out and asked why he was laughing like a madman. Encred laughed while keeping his sword pointed towards Rem, thinking he had mastered the perverted bastard's stab. Encred shouted, thinking he needed to move a little faster, and charged towards the soldier with pure murderous intent. The soldier also lifted his sword to attack, but Encred's blade struck the soldier's helmet with fierce intensity. The soldier counterattacked, slashing Encred's neck. As blood spilled from his wound, Encred thought that his first stab attempt had failed. Refusing to blink, he kept his eyes wide open, determined not to let go of his sword. He held it with pure resolve, thinking about everything that had happened, from each clash of swords to the recent stab. All of it was just in his head. The soldier grinned, kicked Encred's chest as he lay on the ground, and taunted him, pointing his sword and calling it mercy. Encred, with not even a slight bit of fear in his eyes, told the soldier that tomorrow he would die. The soldier laughed and stabbed Encred, piercing his chest and remarking that the dead have no tomorrow. Blood poured out, and the blue pendant shone brightly. Encred, spotting a bug, crushed it underfoot and mentioned that he had seen him heading in a while ago. Rem looked at his foot and thanked him. Encred nonchalantly told Rem to take over his guard duty and walked away, leaving him wondering why he was ordering him around so casually. On the 125th day, Encred called out to a red-haired man, addressing him as Big Eyes. The man responded affirmatively, and Encred instructed him to get shin armor, a shield, and a dagger, adding that he would pay him later, and he walked away. The man inquired about the later payment, saying he would trust Encred because he was his boss, though he didn't usually do favors for anyone. Rem asked if the squad commander had always been this pushy with commands. Jackson, sitting behind them, remarked that they always pushed tasks onto him, calling them lazy. Offended, Rem challenged Jackson, asking if he wanted to taste his axe. Another tall man appeared, wishing Rem his blessing and calling him brother. Rem thought Encred was acting weird today and saying he's unusually intense today. Encred, with a determined and sharp gaze, practiced striking a tree with his sword. He felt incredible pain every time he died and wondered if he would ever win after thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of attempts. He questioned whether he would find a way to escape and survive, whether he would sleep and wake up tomorrow, or whether he would remain stuck in this day. Realizing he was stronger than before, he knew he couldn't be content and had to surpass this challenge. He visualized the soldier who killed him standing and holding a sword. He thought he had learned how to stab and, as he practiced sword mastery, vowed not to abandon this blessing. He continued striking the tree fiercely until his sword pierced through. Encred tied his shoes, donned his armor, and resolved to keep moving forward. As the battle horns blew, he and his squad advanced. In the ensuing war, he fought, thinking that his survival was due to preparation, luck, and a cool head. On the 46th day, he got hit hard on his left shoulder by a spiked mace, but now he was quick to dodge such attacks. The next day, on the 47th, he rolled away from a swinging mace but almost got his head crushed by another enemy. Learning from this close call, he added spins to his moves to strike first. A few days later, on the 71st day, a soldier aimed low and cut off his foot, making him unable to do anything to the stabbing pervert, so he swiftly defeated him. Then, on the 89th day, he narrowly avoided an axe that could have split his head open, realizing this enemy could disrupt his fight with the stabbing pervert. Not willing to let him interfere again, he used his skill in throwing weapons to retaliate, ending the enemy's life with a well-aimed throw. Turning around, he spotted Vel right behind him, a reminder of how danger always lurked nearby. As he blocked an arrow shot by a sharpshooter called the Claw of the Hawk, Encred knew it was his turn to strike back. Facing off against the soldier he had labeled the stabbing pervert, they locked eyes with fierce determination. The soldier swung his sword aggressively, but Encred's armor protected him. Realizing he couldn't just dodge and stab, Encred charged forward, countering each attack carefully. Though the soldier was strong and nearly a prodigy, Encred adapted, using techniques from Valen mercenary swordsmanship. Shouting with determination, Encred aimed a powerful strike, which the soldier barely dodged before trying to strike back. But Encred regained control, shattering the soldier's sword in a decisive clash. As Encred prepared to finish the fight, an arrow aimed at him from behind but was swiftly blocked by Rem's axe. Encred then struck the soldier in the neck. Amid the chaos, Rem rushed forward, ready to confront the Claw of the Hawk, but Janix warned it was too late to help. With the soldier kneeling and blood on the ground, Encred stood silently, sweat dripping down his face as he looked into the soldier's eyes. With a final act of mercy, he ended the long battle by removing the soldier's head with one powerful stroke, showing his determination. Feeling victorious, Encred allowed himself a brief smile, proud of overcoming the wall after trying for so long. But his moment of relief was short-lived, as something suddenly hit him from behind. Rem rushed towards him, with Janix fighting behind him, pointing out a new enemy, the frog. Encred cried out in pain. The frog, pointing at the fallen soldier, sneered that he had invested quite a bit in raising that one, and couldn't believe someone like Encred had defeated him. The dead soldier's body knelt, his neck severed, and blood pooled on the ground. Encred gritted his teeth and glared at Frog. With a menacing sneer, Frog raised his axe and hurled it at Encred, commanding him to die. But Rem appeared out of nowhere, deflecting the axe away. He then attacked Frog with his own weapon, but Frog blocked it. They locked eyes, the air thick with tension, and continued to clash. Encred lay injured on the ground as a soldier approached, his sword drawn. Jackson then appeared and swiftly decapitated the soldier. Meanwhile, Rem and Frog kept fighting. Rem planted his hands on the ground and stood up with full force to attack, while Frog stepped back to strike. They faced each other, weapons poised, ready for the next move. Rem smiled, taunting that if Frog wanted to cut off their squad commander's head, he needed his permission first. Frog, confused, asked if that weakling was truly the squad commander and not him. Looking at Frog, Rem thought that the warrior race of frogs was born to fight, and he would either have to burn him with magic or pierce its heart in one swift strike. A daunting task. Frog looked at his hand, wondering why someone like him was on such a trivial battlefield and thinking that to kill Rem, he would have to put his life on the line. Rem kept watching him, readying himself for another attack, but Frog decided the battle wasn't worth it. They exchanged fierce gazes, and then Frog turned back and walked away. Rem called him a coward. Meanwhile, a soldier rushed at Jackson to attack, but Rem intercepted and killed him with his axe. Another one attempted to attack Jackson, but a squad member rushed in to block the assault. Soldiers kept coming, and the battle was becoming more chaotic. Other squad members also joined them as blood flowed freely. And finally, the guards began shouting to retreat, and Encred, overwhelmed, closed his eyes. Encred heard the sound of a water droplet and a voice saying he had managed to survive a day. But that was it. He opened his eyes, lying on the ground. The voice continued, saying he wouldn't be able to withstand the walls that would keep appearing in his way. The mysterious voice declared that his fate was to despair and give up. Encred thought of fate and, as he stood up, defiantly declared that for him, the walls existed to be overcome. He looked at the masked man with sharp, determined eyes. The masked man smiled, saying he eagerly awaited the moment when those eyes, filled with greed and ambition, completely lost their light. Encred opened his eyes in bed, his body covered in bandages. He looked at the ceiling and asked where he was. Someone said it was the infirmary tent. Encred looked and saw Rem sitting beside him, remarking that he had no problem sleeping for 2 days straight. He got up, and Rem reminded him that he saved him from that frog. Encred, feeling pain in his chest, questioned if it was really a frog at the end and was amazed he survived. Rem told him that his bones weren't broken, but his head was badly shaken, and asked if he remembered him, calling himself his best friend forever. Encred called him a noble hunter and turned his head away, asserting that he never said they were friends. Rem, annoyed, placed his hand over Encred's mouth, telling him to shut up. After a brief silence, he removed his hand and scolded Encred for blurting out secrets. Encred pushed Rem's hand away and questioned whether Rem was someone he had nothing to do with or his best friend, asking him to pick one. He then thought that on a new day beyond today, he had made it out alive. The red-haired man addressed Encred, calling him commander and demanding repayment threefold, asking if he knew how much he had spent to get him into the infirmary. Cries, a member of the 4th squad, made Encred wonder why a regular soldier like him, who would usually be left to tend for himself, was in the infirmary tent. Encred lay down again and sarcastically asked Cries, who was sitting on the bed beside him, why he was nowhere to be seen during the battle. After a brief silence, Cries smiled and offered Encred a special discount, just for him, doubling the repayment. As the sun began to set, 4th squad member Jackson entered the tent and looked at Encred. Encred asked what he wanted and told him to speak up if he had business with him. Jackson threw something towards Encred, instructing him to apply it morning and evening, twice a day, and not to ask where he got it. Encred opened the box and recognized the ointment Jackson used to use, pondering how much Jackson hated sharing his personal items. 4th squad member Auden cried and mumbled near Encred, who told him to leave, reassuring him that he wasn't dead. As night fell, Encred wondered why they were taking shifts after all this time when they usually did whatever they wanted. He questioned if they were worried about him. In the meantime, Ragna, another 4th squad member, entered and asked why Encred was in the infirmary, calling him commander. Munching on an apple, Ragna left as quickly as he had come. Encred closed his eyes, convinced that Ragna didn't care one bit. Besides Encred, there were 2 more soldiers in the infirmary tent. One was a platoon commander from another company who used to pick fights with him. Just like this time, the man demanded to know what Encred was looking at. Without replying, Encred thought about the other soldier, whose name he didn't know and who just stared into space. Encred surmised he was a low-ranked soldier and wondered how he ended up there. Suddenly, some noises came from outside, and all 3 of them looked up. A white-haired, big-eared lady entered the tent and asked who the commander of the 444th squad was, and Encred gave her an interrogative gaze. The woman stood there as the platoon commander looked at her, incredulous, and muttered something about a fairy. She asked which group he was with, and he responded that his name was Vengeance and he was the commander of the 3rd platoon in the 2nd company. She remarked that his company must have taught him to state his race when meeting a superior. Apologizing, Vengeance lowered his gaze. Encred observed this exchange and realized she was the new commander of the 4th Company. Introducing himself, he told her he was Encred, commander of the 4th Squad of the 4th Company, the 4th Platoon. She acknowledged his introduction, commenting that she had heard he was leading his challenging squad members well, and she looked forward to his contributions. Turning away, she began to walk off, leaving Encred thinking that she came here just to say that. But she stopped and asked the soldier his name. The soldier, caught off guard, mumbled and finally said his name was Krang. Encred wondered if he just made that up, noting his bad attitude in front of the company commander and wondering if he was a noble. She glanced at Krang one last time and left the tent, leaving Encred to watch her in silence. As the sun set, Encred clenched his fist tightly, thinking that most of the pain was gone and he could now put strength into his body, meaning it was time to start training. As he dressed, Vengeance asked where he was going. Encred replied that he was heading to the training area. Vengeance called him an idiot for acting tough when he was the lowest-ranking soldier, while Krang watched them silently. Lifting his sword, Encred reflected on the expensive training he had undergone in his youth. He recalled the stabbing pervert's stab at the last moment, pondering what would happen if that last-ditch attack failed. He realized putting all his eggs in one basket was risky. If that one attack failed, he would die. He thought about Rem's lethal axe attacks but was interrupted by Krang's comment that he was working hard. Opening his eyes, he saw Krang sitting in front of him, pointing out that Encred's hands were twitching in the barracks, and now he was spacing out here. Encred explained that he was training his grip strength and replicating his battle. Krang asked why he was doing that, and Encred bluntly replied that he wouldn't get screwed. Krang inquired if he wanted to become something by preserving his life, making Encred reflect on his dream. A dream often mocked by others due to his lowly talent, but one he never stopped desiring to accomplish. He told Krang he wanted to become a knight. Krang looked shocked, and Encred noted it was the first time someone hadn't laughed at him for this dream. Krang stood up, saying he forgot, and suddenly remembered something he needed to do, then walked away. Encred felt strange support for the first time, and Krang smiled, telling him to remember his name as a friend if he became a knight. The next day, soldiers sat together while one shouted about the hero of the battlefield, Cypress. Inside the tent, Vengeance complained about the delayed morning ration, accusing the servers of planning to eat it all by themselves. Encred, after waking up to the wandering minstrel and waiting for breakfast, took a leisurely walk instead of heading to the training area. Jackson asked about his injuries, and Encred replied that the medicine worked well, thanking him. Jackson urged him to hurry back if he was thankful. That night, as Encred lay on his bed, he said good night to Krang, who replied in kind. Encred thought sleeping early was all he did. Vengeance called them crazy bastards, accusing them of talking nonsense. Encred closed his eyes, thinking it was a day of doing nothing. The next morning, Encred woke up to the shouts of Cypress, the hero of the battle. Sitting up, he wondered if the wandering minstrel had come again. Vengeance loudly demanded to know why the morning rations weren't there yet, accusing the servers of planning to eat them all by themselves. Encred, irritated by the repetition, suddenly thought something. He went for a walk and found Jackson, who asked about his injuries. Encred repeated that the medicine worked well and thanked him, realizing it was the same day as yesterday. Recalling a mysterious voice about another wall stopping him, he wondered if he had died without noticing. Feeling more determined, he now knew he had died, seeing the huge wall in front of him as another challenge. That night, lying in bed, Encred pondered who and how they had killed him. He considered that the enemy would have needed to get through all defenses to reach him, something only possible for knights. He wondered if a hidden assassin was the culprit, skilled in assassinations and familiar with the medical barracks. Recalling the fairy woman, he suspected she might have come to scout the location. He decided to confirm this by waiting for the assassin, planning to scream and wake the other soldiers if he saw her. Suddenly, a needle struck him in the neck. He thought, a poisonous needle? He hadn't even seen the assassin enter. He cried out in pain and fell off his bed, realizing he couldn't move or speak. This was a potent numbing poison. He wondered if this was why he died without ever knowing the reason. His thoughts shifted to the others in the tent as he looked at Vengeance, who lay unconscious with a needle in his neck. He thought about Krang and then noticed a man in a cloak standing beside his bed. It's that bastard, the assassin, he thought, and he tried to reach him. The assassin pointed his sword at Krang and stabbed him brutally in the chest. Encred was shocked and helpless. Suddenly, someone cut the tent with a sword, and Encred saw another assassin in a red cloak. He looked at the ears and the weapon in her hands and thought so it was really her, the company leader. The day repeated again, and as the morning began, the wanderer shouted, asking who the hero of the battlefield was, with the soldiers answering Cyprus. Sitting on his bed, Encred thought about the same morning occurring 3 times in a row. He recalled the assassin attack and how he had stayed alert but couldn't detect their presence. This wouldn't be easy, he realized. Plus, there was the company commander to face right after stopping the assassins. He felt a sense of helplessness, much like a few days ago during a fight with the stabbing pervert. But he remembered he had won that fight, so he'd definitely find a way. Determined, he walked out of the tent, thinking that as long as he didn't give up, he'd be fine. He removed the blanket, and Vengeance asked what was wrong with him today, saying he was acting crazy. Encred realized he had been wrong in assuming the assassins would have already infiltrated the base by then and decided to be wary of the outside. As he put his sword in its case and looked aside, Vengeance called him a crazy bastard, asking if today's training was to catch cockroaches with a sword, adding with a smirk that it was fitting for low-life soldiers. Encred turned back and told Vengeance he didn't know he cared so much about him. Vengeance, with sarcasm dripping from his voice, called him the son of a butcher. Encred looked at him and thought he was being sarcastic too. Vengeance shouted at him to screw off, saying he didn't even want to see his face. Krang came in, asking if they were arguing and if he should come back later. Encred said it was fine and invited him in. Vengeance called them annoying bastards. As he watched Krang set up his bed, Encred thought that, considering how observant the assassins were of him, Krang must be their target. He felt suspicious of Krang, wondering who he was, and decided not to dig into something his opponent wasn't willing to tell him. Unlike those crazy bastards lying and doing their stuff, pointing towards his squad members. However, since he was involved in the assassination, Encred felt it was okay to ask. He called Krang by name and asked who he was. Krang looked at him in silence for a while. Receiving no response, Encred wondered if he had phrased it wrongly. Perhaps his conversational skills were on par with Rem's. Krang finally responded, inquiring about the question and adding that it wasn't something he could tell him. Encred asked why he couldn't tell him. Krang explained that it was a long story. Encred remained silent for a while, then added that if he said so. Vengeance got offended, asking Encred if he was kidding him and saying that if he was just going to accept that kind of answer, then don't even ask in the first place, calling him a shithead. He shouted, pointing his finger, and demanded to know if Krang or Crab, whatever he was from this country, considering his manners, and asked Krang to be honest and tell him which country's spy he was. Krang looked at him in pure silence, frightening Vengeance. He then moved towards his bed and said he hadn't and wouldn't betray the kingdom. Encred looked at him, noting an aura like that of a knight in his eyes and movements. Vengeance asked if that was how he should be speaking to his higher-ups. Krang called him sir and laughed. Encred thought that Krang wasn't a knight since he was powerless against the assassin, but he was definitely hiding something. Krang wished Encred a good night. Encred wished him the same, while Vengeance only cleared his throat. Encred wondered if Vengeance was scared of Krang because of what had happened earlier, as he had been strangely calm. He then looked outside and thought that if the assassins were to barge in, they would all die. He got up and started walking away. Vengeance asked what he was doing instead of sleeping. He told him that assassins were going to invade the tent soon and asked him to cooperate if he wanted to live. Vengeance looked at him in confusion, then lay on his bed, turning away from him, and said he must have lost his mind. Krang was also sleeping soundly. Encred looked at them and thought that was the reaction he expected. Suddenly, he heard someone say how he had noticed. As he tried to see, a sword pierced through his neck, and assassins attacked from outside the tent, ripping it apart. He was shocked, thinking just when, and tried to draw his sword. The assassins also attacked Vengeance, piercing his neck, and Krang was also stabbed by them. Encred looked at them and fell to the ground, blood dripping from his neck. The day repeated, and Encred kept hearing the voice asking who was the hero of the battlefield. He sat, holding his head, thinking it was the 4th time. Since there was no evidence that the assassins were coming, he wouldn't be able to get help from Vengeance and Krang. He thought he should inform the higher-ups to get reinforcements. But as he did so, a man asked if he had gone insane and told him to screw off before he made him shut up permanently. Encred stood near the entrance of the tent, thinking maybe he could predict the moment the assassins would appear and scream right before they did. He looked outside, wondering if it was now or not. He thought perhaps now. As he shouted assassins, a sword pierced his neck. Blood flowed from his neck as the assassins entered the tent, and he cursed that they were too fast. The next night, he sat there, holding his sword, thinking there was no way to get help from others. He needed to ambush them and defeat them before they tried anything. Again, he got hit by the poison needle, and blood began to flow from his neck. He wondered how he was supposed to fight an enemy he couldn't see. The next night he stood, thinking he couldn't see them, but they could see him. An assassin appeared behind him and pushed a poison needle into his neck. He thought that as long as he couldn't avoid their poison needle, he would die without being able to do anything. The day repeated, and the next morning, again, he woke up to the shouts of who was the hero of the battlefield. He held his sword tightly, thinking it was the 20th morning, and he couldn't do anything at all. A smile appeared on his face as he thought he had only died 20 times. While walking, he thought he needed to think of a way to avoid the poison needle first and then deal with the assassins after that. He thought that he needed to find a way to avoid their attacks faster than they could see. He found Jackson cleaning something and recalled when he asked Rem why Jackson was called a perverted wildcat. Rem had said that Jackson was a dirty pervert who never tried to fight his enemies head-on and enjoyed backstabbing them and running off. Jackson called Encred, asking if his injuries were okay now. Encred looked at him, thinking he assumed Jackson would easily win against the assassins, but he couldn't just take him with him since he didn't have the authority to do so. Even if he could, that was the wall he must face by himself. He thought then he would become Jackson himself, and he asked Jackson what he would have to do to stop someone like him from stabbing him in the back. After thinking for a while, Jackson told him he wasn't sure because no one had ever survived his ambushes. Encred looked at him in shock. Jackson remained silent for a second, but then explained that Encred would need eyes on the back of his head to avoid getting killed. Encred got confused hearing this and asked what he meant by the eyes on the back of his head. Jackson thought it was the perfect time for an example and mentioned a wagon behind the tents to encircle. Encred was surprised to see that Jackson knew there was a wagon and couldn't understand how he was able to see something so far away. He questioned if Jackson really had eyes on the back of his head. Jackson told Encred that it was going to fall apart, and the wagon fell apart just a second later. Encred was shocked to see this and asked if Jackson was a prophet. Jackson thought he had spent too much time with the barbarian after hearing Encred's conclusion. Encred asked how Jackson knew, to which he explained it was sound. He heard the creaking from the wagon's axle and explained that just by observing sound, he was able to predict what was going to happen next. Encred was shocked to see Jackson hear something so quiet. Encred wasn't even aware of the wagon getting close. Jackson kept explaining how he didn't need to see to sense what was around him. If he kept trying to listen to what was around him and practice to hone his senses and isolate the sounds, he could observe his surroundings easily. Encred was grateful to Jackson for giving him such a detailed explanation and thought Jackson was too lazy in the beginning to even properly respond to him. Jackson said he was lazy, but this was better than babysitting himself. Jackson thought nowadays it felt like Encred wouldn't give up addressing him as the squad leader. During the night, while practicing to hone his senses, Encred hit the second wall in the form of faceless death. He needed to sense the assassins in order to live. He observed the surroundings using sound waves and realized regular footsteps meant it was the patrol, and he could also hear the sound of the torches. He tried to pinpoint the killer. He struggled to locate the killer, got assassinated, and failed. The next day, after waking up, he heard voices asking who's the hero of the battlefield. The voices yelled the name of Cypress. He got out of his tent and realized that even though he hadn't taken a step forward, his body remembered everything clearly, and he had learned a lot. He heard Jackson's words explaining how, just through sounds alone, he could gain a lot of information about his surroundings and could tell the location of something based on the intensity and direction of the sound. Once he could hear faraway sounds that were extremely faint, he might as well use his ears as a second pair of eyes. Jackson snapped his finger and explained that the sound waves traveled in all directions, no matter how silent they were. In such a chaos of thousands of sounds mixed together, it was needed to isolate one single wave. Encred started practicing and could hear the people chatter about stuff like a new beauty in town and someone talking about why they took another person's neck. Encred questioned what sounds were mixed among the entangled sound waves and tired of focusing more on categorizing and isolating them. He tried to observe the flags and counted them from 7 to 10. He heard the people marching and felt the waves of wind. He observed all the familiar and unfamiliar sounds but got disturbed by Krang, who addressed Encred as NC and asked what kind of training he was doing. I got annoyed by the nickname, and Krang asked if he was okay with it. Encred said it wasn't okay, but he didn't care either way. Encred told Krang that he was just sitting like an idiot, and it didn't look like he was training. Krang said Encred wasn't an idiot who wasted time. At night, while observing, Encred realized the faceless assassin was trying to kill him but got hit in the neck before that, and the assassin killed Krang as well. Encred felt hopeless as Krang died, and he realized it was his 33rd failure. He tried once more and kept failing and failing. He realized he didn't need more experience or divine intervention. There was no sudden realization either. He just needed to repeatedly do what he needed to do. Encred opened his eyes as he sensed someone. It was Krang, who was surprised because he thought he snuck up on Encred but still got caught. Krang realized he was training for perception since his eyes were closed for a while. Krang said Encred wasn't an idiot who wasted time. At night, Encred's eyes widened as he realized the assassin and dodged the attack. He pulled out his sword and quickly pushed the assassin back. Encred, with a crazy look on his face, he realized he had succeeded. He was no longer going to experience a faceless death. The assassin got mad and rushed forward to attack Encred. Encred realized he wasn't as good as the stabbing pervert and thought he could handle this assassin. Encred realized vengeance was already stabbed in the throat while Krang got up anxiously. He focused on the assassin since he was still experienced and could kill Encred. The assassin threw a knife towards Encred, which he barely dodged. Encred saw the ferry company commander enter the tent and jumped in to stab first to avoid death. The assassin addressed the ferry commander as a guard and threw sharp objects towards Krang, trying to kill him. Krang, in complete confusion, froze in fear, and the ferry commander jumped towards Krang, trying to protect him from the sharp objects. Encred realized she wasn't with the assassin and came to protect them. He didn't care about this and rushed forward to not lose his chance to kill the assassin. The assassin used his knife to defend himself from Encred's attack and quickly ran away to save his life. Krang realized the assassin was here for him. Encred knew, which shocked Krang, and he questioned Encred. Encred explained that no one would pay for an assassin to kill a boot like him out of vengeance. The ferry commander praised Encred for his speed. Encred realized she was an ally until now and won't let anything be known or leave witnesses. Encred remained silent for a while, and Krang asked the ferry commander a favor. He didn't want anyone to die. The ferry commander bows and understands his command. It included the platoon commander's vengeance too, who wasn't dead yet. The ferry commander assured me that they had the antidote, so he would be fine even after getting stabbed in the neck with poison. Encred realized she knew about antidotes as well. Krang thought they needed to clean up the mess that the assassin left behind so people could not find out about it. I thought it would be fine as long as no traces were left. Krang tried to find an easy way and set the whole tent on fire. Everyone rushed towards the medical tent, worrying about the fire. Encred and Vengeance survived, and Encred thought that with the fire, all the traces would get burned. So there was nothing to worry about and the people would take care of the aftermath. During the night, while walking through a jungle, the commander fairy told Krang that he would have been dead without the squad leader. She asked if he changed his mind because of Encred. He said she was right and he thought Encred was interesting. He had been trying to avoid people, but Encred rubbed one off on him. He smiled as he thought about Encred. Krang decided they'd meet again, but in their representative roles next time. Encred saw the curse fade away, cautioning him that he would see him again. Encred looked ready for it. The next day, Encred thought he had confronted the repeating day once more. He survived the silent death, and now he can sense the presence of most things. He was worried about why he still couldn't sense the ferry commander and thought he had a lot to do when he was going to get back. Encred was happy he didn't get hurt and could return immediately. The platoon commander, with an annoyed face, asked why Encred saved him from the fire. Encred got annoyed and questioned why the platoon leader disliked Encred so much. Encred told him that he saved the Vengeance from fire because they're comrades, and he doesn't need any more reasons. Vengeance remained silent and labeled Encred as selfless because he didn't treat Encred well before and yet got saved by Encred. He asked if Encred was returning, to which Encred said he was, and Vengeance cautioned him about the trashy vibe of his squad these days. Encred asked if something had happened. Vengeance explained that there was a rumor going on about the base being cursed. Ragna called Rem an underdeveloped monkey and told him not to mess with him. Rem got annoyed, and everyone started running because the squad was fighting again. Everyone understood they were acting like animals because their squad leader, Encred, wasn't here. Rem picked up Ragna and threw him on the ground, messing up people's tents. Ragna got up and attacked Rem, but he dodged it and punched Ragna very hard. Rem was about to use his axe to destroy Ragna while everyone was saving themselves because they had weapons now. Ragna gripped his sword and was ready to split Rem in half. The people tried to find the other squad members who could stop Ragna and Rem, but no one was around. Encred came to the base and saw them fighting. He didn't care if they were called curses. He was just happy that they were his curses. Encred yelled at them to stop, which surprised them. They questioned him when he got back and asked how he wasn't already dead. Encred said he didn't know how he was alive, but he would definitely go crazy if they kept this up. For days passed after Encred returned to his squad. Encred was sleeping peacefully but opened his eyes after he heard someone. It was Jackson, who was trying to leave quietly but got worried if he woke up. Encred said he was going to wake up and work out anyway, so it was okay. Jackson realized he was already really good at listening, even though he just started. Encred said he practiced, and Jackson told him to keep it up as it will be useful someday. There were only a few battles going on because winter was approaching, so Encred started exercising and decided he'd use all the extra time he had to train and get stronger. A voice from beneath the rock greeted Encred. He realized it was Auden doing push-ups while using the rock as weight. Auden asked if Encred was going back from his morning workouts and realized Encred wasn't wasting any time, which was good because a well-trained body was a weapon in itself. Auden got up and looked down on Encred as he mentioned that Encred couldn't withstand a kick from the frog and that he should train harder as he was still too thin. Encred thought Auden was just too large but agreed to Auden's advice and told Auden that he would try. Auden asked if Encred still remembered the training method he taught him before. Inside the tents, Rem smashed Ragna on the ground and called him lazy for still sleeping instead of completing his duties. Ragna crawled towards his sword and grabbed it. He got up and they both attacked each other, but Encred and Auden entered the tent, which surprised them. Encred asked why they were fighting again and told them to stop. Auden thought violence solved nothing. Rem said Ragna didn't fulfill his duties of cooking, but after Encred ordered Ragna himself, he agreed to cook. Rem told him to stop being so violent if he's going to end up cooking anyway. Ragna left after calling Rem smelly, which made him anxious about his clothes. Encred told Rem to stop fighting and asked if he was bored. Rem smiled and agreed, saying he was bored and the lack of battles was making him itchy. Encred told him to not fight random people and challenged him to a duel. They started fighting and after getting hit, Encred slowed down. Rem told Encred to take hits better and attacked him with his axe, but Encred blocked it with his sword. Encred tried to keep his cool and dodged another attack from Rem using his hearing. He used the thing that he practiced by dying 100 times. He tried to stab Rem's throat, but Rem easily dodged it and grabbed Encred's sword with his axe. He pushed Encred down to the ground and Encred lost. Rem said he was expecting more from Encred this time since he was improving at such a fast rate. He asked Encred why he became boring all of a sudden, and the same stab-bored Remington Encred got up knowing he was different from before, since now he could repeat everything hundreds and thousands of times to go forward. Encred challenged Rem to come at him, as he would properly destroy Rem this time. Rem thought Encred didn't have many skills, but the determination in his eyes was fun to see. Rem determinedly accepted Encred's challenge. It started raining heavily, and they had to stop their duel. The rain kept starting and stopping. Rem was annoyed because he wasn't getting to fight much. Ragna was sleeping while Auden was praying. Kreis entered the tent, annoyed because he had to cancel his duel again. He was starting to believe the rumors about people calling it a curse. Encred was questioned about the curse and remembered Vengeance. She also talked about it. Vengeance said their encampment was cursed. Kreis explained that the weather was weird, casualties increased as well, and tents were starting to catch fire. Especially the scout squad, Jack Bow and Rotten were all hurt. People were saying they were cursed because of all that. Kreis was sure they weren't cursed, but the temperamental weather added to the rumors. I thought the higher-ups wouldn't let this go unnoticed. Kreis asked why Encred was standing at the entrance. Encred told him that he was honing his senses. Kreis got confused since the rain was pouring. Encred said he was doing this because of the downpour. Rem thought it was useless while Jackson praised Encred for training this way, which annoyed Remington. Rem asked when he taught him such stuff and when Jackson started caring about the squad leader. Encred thought it was too loud in the tent to train anything. Rem got angry after Jackson ignored him while Auden asked if Encred was looking for ways to train in the tent since there were some things he could try while lying down. Ragna asked if Encred wanted him to look at Encred's stance. Encred thought they all noticed. They smiled at each other and Rem asked if he noticed right. Inside a tent, the higher-ups were seen discussing the soldiers and deciding they should send a scouting party before winter once again. The man asked if anyone had suggestions to fill the gap, and the ferry commander suggested the 444th squad leader. The commander called Encred stupid and worried if he would hold back the other scouts as well. The ferry commander mentioned that he could bring unexpected results. The man asked her for reasons to suggest Encred, to which she replied that it was just her fairy instinct speaking. The next day, Encred realized he was being sent to the scouts. Kryze asked Encred if he had done something to piss off the company commander. Encred was unsure himself, and Kryze asked why he got picked, specifically if he didn't do anything. Encred thought the fairy commander wouldn't kill him since Krang had already left. Rem asked if Encred was going to go with the scouts. Rem said he could help manage something else if Encred didn't want to go. Encred said it was impossible, as he couldn't use an axe on his superiors like Remington. Rem said he wasn't going to suggest something like that. Encred told him not to pull such stuff off either, as he had a history of doing such things. Auden asked the father why he was testing their leader like this and didn't want to lose their precious little squad leader. Encred. Encred was confused seeing his squad members. Ragna, while watching them, got up and said he could go instead of Encriding. Encred said he might let others go, but not him. Rem told him not to, as he would just get lost. Jackson remembered Encred was going to scout the tall grassy fields and suggested he pay close attention to the changes in grass noises and notice disturbances, which was the first step to overcoming any ambush. Rem got angry at Jackson for trying to teach Encred anything and told him to stop out of jealousy. Encred realized they'll fight once he's gone, and was worried if leaving was the right choice. Encred knew he was the best suited for the job. After enlisting and becoming a soldier, due to his lackluster skills, Encred was constantly moved around and had to fill other people's places. The place he ended up being useful was leading his members. Rem and Jackson started fighting and were about to attack each other, but Encred came between them and stopped them. Encred told them to stop, and Rem asked if Encred was stupid or brave for jumping in between without hesitation. Jackson told Rem that he should be thanking Encred, because Jackson was about to put another hole in Rem's heart. Rem, with an annoyed face, said he would have cut Jackson's head first. Encred thought these goons he had as his members were really valuable. Compared to them, Encred wasn't that bad when it came to combat power as well. He thought there was no need to overthink, and Encred understood how he stood in terms of skills and would just work hard to get better. The next day, while leaving with different soldiers for scouting, Encred realized the scouts would go ahead so he could spend time training and honing his senses. The soldier saw Encred and addressed him as the leftover squad leader. He told Encred to focus, which annoyed him. Scout leader Andrew Gardner made it clear that despite being the same rank as the squad leader, he was still better, and if they had any problems, they could fight it out with each other. One of the squad members with a cheeky smile said Encred probably didn't have enough balls to defend himself as he was in the outcast squad. The other soldier called Encred dumb and questioned if he could even hold a sword properly. Andrew said he would try not to hurt Encred if they did face each other. He called Encred a useless leader whose squad only ran because of his members. Andrew announced to attack and kill the enemies if they faced any. All the members yelled in agreement. Encred questioned if they even understood what scouting was. He realized that the squad leader was completely dumb and questioned if they'd even succeed in this mission. The soldiers found some tracks on the ground, and Andrew tried to analyze them and concluded that these were NU tracks. Andrew decided they'd follow the tracks and have barbecue tonight. Encred realized NUs traveled in groups of at least 20, and was worried about how Andrew was going to face them. He couldn't understand what was going on in Andrew's head. The other soldier, who had green hair, showed disappointment and mentioned that it was Gazelle's tracks and not news. The green-haired soldier realized Encred was listening to him and mentioned how obnoxious Andrew was. His name was Henri, and he was a member of the scout squad. He was previously a hunter in a mountain town and didn't care much about the squad leader. Both Encred and Henri became friends very quickly. Henri talked about the basics of being a hunter, which I found very useful. Henri mentioned there were usually separate paths for animals in these fields and decided he'd write more about it. The scouts wasted their whole day trying to trace the NUs that weren't there. Andrew was in disbelief and needed results. The next day, they reached their destination, where they were supposed to recon. It was called Green Pearl, which was also known as the uselessly tall grass field. The squad looked hesitant as they faced the grassy fields, and Andrew explained that they'd cross these grass fields and locate the hostile scouting party. They will bring their enemies back as prisoners and get rewarded. The soldiers yelled in agreement, while Henri was hesitant if they were really going inside since they were only supposed to scout up there. Encred said it was the leader's command, so they had to go anyway. The soldiers navigated through the grassy fields and thought Andrew would give up since walking through such a place wasn't easy. To begin with, this was unexpected since Andrew was taking everything seriously and moving forward. Henri mentioned not seeing any animal droppings, which was worrying him. Encred asked if that was an issue, and Henri explained that it meant there weren't any animals in a place where food was abundant. I heard something and was shocked. He realized it was an animal and quickly told everyone to get down as they got attacked by enemy forces. Some soldiers died with arrow gun shots, and the rest, along with Encred, Henri, and Andrew, ran to save themselves. The soldiers caught Andrew and Henri and killed them. Even after trying to get away, Encred got surrounded by the enemies. While racing through the fields with soldiers in pursuit, Encred realized that the listening technique he had learned from Jackson was indeed useful, but only to a degree. The din of the battle made it hard for him to discern anything clearly. Arrows flew from every direction, piercing his body. Encred understood that being ambushed was inevitable and knew he had to evade it if possible. As another cycle started, Andrew's voice cut through the chaos, calling Encred a madman and threatening to sever his head. Encred doubted they would heed his words and wondered if he needed to find a way to escape alone. The shouts of ambush filled the air, and Encred tried to take a different route, but the enemy blocked him. A soldier struck him with a spear from the front, while another attacked from behind. Encred reassured himself that he could find another path, encouraged by the repetitive nature of the days. More arrows rained down, and Encred felt himself being overwhelmed, knowing he was surrounded by about 20 crossbowmen from the east. Despite his efforts, he was eventually riddled with arrows and fell. As he fought off the attackers, Encred found himself moving to avoid the crossbowmen, only to encounter a squad of spearmen. Their green-dyed uniforms indicated they had been prepared for an ambush. Encred, lying on the ground, wondered what could be so important in this field that required such preparation. His thoughts were interrupted when a soldier drove a sword into his neck. Blood pooled around him as he cursed the Aspen soldiers, pondering what secrets they were hiding. Andrew's voice again rose above the clamor, declaring their intention to cross the field, capture the scouting party, and claim their reward. Encred knew from experience that every attempt had ended in failure and death. He needed to uncover the Aspen soldier's secret but questioned whether giving up on this goal would save his life. Henry's voice jolted him back to reality as he addressed him as squad leader. Encred resolved not to retreat but to face the challenge head-on. Andrew criticized him as a useless leader and demanded action. A squad member tried to mediate, acknowledging Encred's struggles but suggesting he go along with them, as their squad leader had his own difficulties. Encred confronted the soldier, challenging his tolerance for their ineffective leader. The soldier asked what Encred meant, but Encred was done with the pretense. Andrew, with his hand on his sword, challenged Encred's authority. Encred decided it was time to take charge, declaring that disobedience would not be tolerated. He resolved to command and utilize everyone's strengths to survive together. Andrew's anger flared, and he called Encred a fool. Encred assessed Andrew Gardner, the scout leader, and his bodyguard, Henri. Encred noted that Andrew was skilled but seemed overly dependent on his protection, hinting at a possible noble background. Andrew's insult about Encred's skills contrasted sharply with his high rank, but Encred ignored it. Andrew insisted on his mission and challenged Encred to prove himself. Encred dismissed Andrew's taunts and told him to fight without his sword. As Andrew charged, Encred saw through his overconfidence and dodged the attack, landing a decisive punch that sent Andrew crashing to the ground. The squad members were stunned, with one noting Encred's humble origins. Encred announced that he would now lead the squad and asked if anyone had objections. Silence followed his declaration, and Andrew could only curse in response. Encred saw this as a crucial first step in taking control. As they moved through the field under the setting sun, one squad member questioned Encred's plan. Encred asked Henri about his dreams. Learning that he wanted to marry a woman who ran a flower shop, Encred urged him to survive the day to achieve his dream. He then asked the others about their goals. One soldier mentioned his newborn child and his desire to be present for his family. Encred emphasized that they all needed to survive for their loved ones. He then turned to Andrew, who spoke of fulfilling his mother's last wish and restoring House Gardner. Encred noted that their goals were aligned, but they needed to escape to achieve them. He rallied the squad to focus on survival, believing that the will to live was the strongest motivator. Encred planned to break through by ambushing the enemy. He instructed Henri to shoot an arrow at head height, despite Henry's doubts. When Henri complied, the arrow struck an enemy soldier, prompting cries of ambush. Encred urged Andrew to follow him, and despite Andrew's curses, he complied. Encred knew that, to gain the upper hand, they needed to find and ambush the enemy first. As he fought with his sword, He felt a flicker of hope that their escape might be within reach. The enemy soldiers erupted in confusion, shouting for their comrades to kill them. From behind, Andrew emerged, swiftly stabbing one of their attackers in the neck. Encred seized the moment, knowing they had to capitalize on the disarray to reduce the enemy numbers as much as possible. He knew that if he brought Andrew along, the bodyguard would follow, significantly increasing their chances of success. As the fight raged on, the enemy force, initially 12 strong, dwindled to 8. An enemy soldier called for reinforcements, shouting about an ambush, while another swore in frustration, wondering how many there were. Encred saw the chaos and shouted for his team to finish the enemies off. A fierce battle ensued. In the tall grass, the enemy struggled to locate them, and their earlier focus on a black beast had made them miss the ambush. Encred recalled that the beast he had seen before had led to their discovery, but this time, it had distracted the enemy, making their ambush easier. Henri, catching his breath among the fallen enemy soldiers, declared the fight was over. The rest of the squad also took a moment to recover. Encred told them they needed to move immediately. The beast watched him intently. Despite one casualty, their unit still had 6 members left. Although saving everyone had been impossible through multiple cycles, this time they had the most survivors. Encred knew they needed to keep moving. He eliminated an enemy soldier and realized that because of today's repetitions, he knew the enemy's numbers and positions. If they continued straight, they would be annihilated by 30 crossbowmen. He decided to lead his squad to avoid them. He also thought about how the persistent spearmen who had tracked them every day needed to be dealt with quickly, or they would hinder their progress. He aimed to avoid difficult battles, using hit-and-run tactics to gradually escape the enemy's encirclement. As Andrew eliminated another soldier, a squad member expressed concern that Andrew was overexerting himself, and about the increasing difficulty of finding the exit as darkness fell. Encred insisted they needed to escape while there was still light. He instructed the squad to follow him. When a member questioned the direction, claiming it was deeper inside, Encred affirmed it was the right way and declared he wouldn't entertain any disagreements. The squad member, pointing his sword at Encred, threatened to kill him if necessary to save himself. Encred took hold of the squad member's sword and made it clear that survival was his goal too. Andrew reflected on Encred, who defied his expectations of being useless, unlike his father, who had squandered their family's wealth. He remembered his father's dying wish for him to become a leader, someone who could earn trust and rebuild their family. He had always aspired to be the kind of person who paved the way for others. Encred urged the squad to trust him for their survival. Andrew moved forward, pledging to trust Encred and calling him captain. The squad member hesitated but was silenced by Andrew's assertion that the captain's orders were final. Encred instructed them to follow him quietly and crouched, signaling that the first step in their escape was to ambush the enemy to break free from the encirclement. The second step, crucial after numerous attempts, was to avoid confrontation at this specific time and place. As they stealthily navigated through the enemy ranks, Encred felt that the plan was proceeding as intended. With the sun setting and darkness enveloping them, Encred knew why they had always failed to escape this field. In the meantime, they arrived. Henri looked around, disbelieving, and another squad member swore upon realizing they had ended up at the enemy camp. Encred deduced that the Aspens were eliminating everyone in the field to conceal something critical. He reasoned that if something more important than capturing them was happening, an opportunity for their escape would surely present itself. With determination, he urged the squad to keep moving, believing that a way out would reveal itself. A squad member questioned Encred's sanity, incredulous at the idea of setting the enemy camp on fire while they were right in the middle of it, as they could easily be surrounded and killed. Encred asked the man's name, and he was curtly told to call him Mac. Encred made it clear that disobedience would not be tolerated. Mac, clearly annoyed, called him a fool, but Andrew stepped in, telling Mac to be quiet. Despite his frustration, Mac realized that, with the moon hidden behind clouds, they had no choice but to trust their squad leader. Encred tore through a tent, and Mac cursed at what he was doing. He saw that the tent was empty and wondered why they hadn't encountered any enemy soldiers yet, even though they were clearly deep within the camp. Encred told them to wait and reflected on his previous infiltrations of the camp as part of the repeated cycles. He remembered the flag he had noticed earlier, which had drawn the entire base's attention when he touched it. Encred revealed to his squad members that the flag was the key the Aspen soldiers were desperate to protect. Mac asked what would happen if the flag were to catch fire and realized Encred must have known about it all along. Mac's thoughts turned to the company commander, who had put Encred in this position, suspecting a hidden agenda. Encred then outlined their plan. They would split into two groups, one to act as bait and draw the enemy's attention, and the other to start the fire. Mac, who had complained earlier, now volunteered to be part of the bait group. Encred, although surprised, felt that this was the best today he had experienced so far and felt a surge of confidence. As a stone struck an enemy soldier, the others saw Mac running and shouted intruders. The enemy soldiers charged, shouting to capture them. Encred dashed towards a fire lamp, ready to ignite it and move on to the next day. But before he could throw it, an enemy soldier smashed the lamp. Encred, caught off guard, was taken aback by this unexpected opponent. The soldier taunted him, calling him a rat, and Encred retorted that they were already late. Amidst the chaos, shouts of fire and the tents burning filled the air. Another soldier shouted to capture the intruders, focusing first on putting out the flames. Encred noted that Mac had drawn most of the enemies away, and Andrew had set the tents ablaze. Now he needed to make his escape. He assessed the soldier in front of him, aiming to exploit any weakness, and then charged with his sword, but the soldier dodged and countered with a stab to Encred's back. Suppressing the pain, Encred realized it was the most precise stab he could have managed. The soldier mocked him, and Encred acknowledged his current limitations. He had fought through ambushes and countless deaths to get here, and now this soldier was the true wall of the day. Encred knew that if he fell here, he would have to reclaim leadership of the squad, escape through the fields, and face countless todays again. The soldier, noticing Encred's smile, questioned if he was laughing and threatened to cut him up and feed him to the dogs. Encred, determined to overcome this challenge, rushed towards the soldier, ready to face whatever came next. Their swords collided with a resounding clang, and Encred's mind raced as he realized the soldier had managed to parry his attack. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the soldier poised to strike again, and he barely dodged the blow. The soldier attacked once more, and Encred narrowly evaded, thinking how he could have swung up from that position. Encred blocked the soldier's sword, marveling at the speed and precision of his movements. There was no opening for a counterattack. The gap in their skills was immense. With a desperate attempt, Encred threw a dagger, but the soldier deflected it effortlessly with the back of his hand before charging at him again. Amidst the chaos, someone shouted that the fire was spreading. Another voice echoed the alarm, yelling that oil had been poured and the flames were advancing towards the flag. A cloaked man addressed the soldier, calling him the platoon commander and urging him to recognize the gravity of the situation. The commander glanced at Encred, acknowledging that this opponent wouldn't fall easily. With a calculated decision, he told Encred they would meet again and turned to walk away. Encred, astonished, he thought, is he really backing off this easily? He wondered if this commander wasn't the true wall he needed to overcome today. But Andrew's urgent voice interrupted his thoughts, insisting they needed to move. With a torn expression, Encred looked between the retreating commander and Andrew before shouting for his squad to retreat. As they fled, Encred realized one of their men had died, leaving only 5 of them. Mac shouted in disbelief, questioning if this was the end and whether the enemy would send a large-scale pursuit. Encred, uncertain, replied that they probably wouldn't. Henri, coughing, noticed the enemy soldiers rushing towards them, shouting not to let them escape. They encountered more enemies ahead and swiftly dealt with them. Encred urged his squad not to hesitate and to keep running. Henri mentioned that if they headed towards the habitat of the field fox and snake, their pursuers wouldn't follow. A squad member supporting Henri questioned if it wouldn't also be harder for them to navigate. Henri assured them he knew a safer route, a hunter's path. Encred, trusting him, told Henri to lead the way. As they entered a dark, narrow path, Encred noted the absence of pursuing footsteps. He thinks that thanks to Andrew and Mac's efforts, they had managed to shake off their pursuers, and Henry's pathfinding skills had also been crucial. It had taken the combined efforts of every squad member to get this far. As dawn broke, Encred saw the sun rising behind the mountains. They had run through the night and continued with the new day's light. As they finally reached their camp, a man asked what had happened to them. Henri sighed, admitting he was about to pass out. Encred reflected that another today had passed and a new day was beginning. Meanwhile, back at the enemy camp, the commander questioned the cloaked man about the flag. The man replied that they needed to prepare again, expressing surprise that the famed gray dog couldn't stop a few enemy soldiers. The company commander of the Grey Dog couldn't comprehend how his best soldier stationed in the tall grass fields had been breached by a small enemy force that set a fire and escaped. Grey Dog was a company that operated independently. Its name derives from a persistent dog in the Principality of Aspen, known for its tenacity in love and war. Thus, the company was also known as the Persistent Lovers. A man asked the platoon commander, Mitch Hurrier, if the one he faced was strong. Mitch affirmed him that without the fire, he would have ended up dead. The man noted that luck was a skill too. Mitch vowed it wouldn't happen again. Sitting inside his tent, Encred was bothered that he had faced that wall, but couldn't overcome it. He yearned to continue fighting, confident that eventually he would prevail. Mitch, meanwhile, resolved to kill Encred with his own hands. And so, the Persistent Lovers set their next target.